Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LCK week number 4 overview and analysis video in the spring split. We keep trucking along in the LCK. We haven't seen a ton of upsets over the course of this year up until this point, but that might change just a little bit this week. I'm excited to get into it. If you're excited for week number 4, let me know down in the comment section below. Of course, as per usual, you can check out the LCK playlist up in the iCard if you want to see my overviews and analysis of the first 3 weeks or what I thought going into the split, all of that stuff. But let's go ahead and get into the content, shall we? If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 10, kind of talking about where I think these teams are heading. But like I said, not a lot has changed for me in terms of my perception of a lot of these teams. We'll see if any of that changes in week number 4. But the only way to find out is to talk about these games and these series themselves. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into day number 1. And we kick day number 1 off with a pretty fun series here, all things considered, between DRX and KT Rolster, which KT is going to be able to take 2-0. Pretty predictable outcome here. I know a lot of people are kind of out on KT, me included. I've been kind of on the, the KT hate train for a majority of this year, if that's what you want to call it. I have not really believed in this team, this group of players, this organization to really make proper decisions, but DRX is in an even bigger free fall at the current moment. If DNF didn't exist, they would easily be the worst team in the LCK, but luckily they're saved from that moniker, but they're going to move to 1-6. They're going to continue to look much more incompetent than they did at any point in the the winter split, I should say. And it just is unfortunate because I do think there are talented players on this team. I just don't think they get the chance to really be talented. So let's go ahead and talk about it for KT. Player of the series, it's going to go to Dektum in the bot lane. Man, did we really need to see this kind of performance. It's actually back-to-back series now where Dektum has played incredibly well for KT, and that is a very encouraging trait. Now, last time, I do think it was, Peter really stepping up and kind of being that player of the series, and Cuz and Casting finally really stepping in and making the most of their opportunities. This time it felt much more evenly spread out amongst KT. I think Dektum was the focal point in terms of where a lot of the gold and damage was coming from on both the Misfortune and the Varus throughout both games 1 and 2, but a lot of setup coming in for KT. I think especially that Varus game in game number 2 was really impressive in terms of the positioning that Dektum offered. This is kind of the Dektum that we've seen over the course of his career. This is how he usually plays. I know that people might be really out on him because a lot of narratives going into this year were really low on Dektum, and a lot of people just kind of took that, ran with it, and then he started off bad, and so people just assumed that that's what he was. This is more the Dektum that I think we all expected coming over to KT, and it has kind of finally started to click. It looks like Peter as a promotion has definitely been a positive for KT, and I think this hopefully will stabilize them. This is clearly their starting 5 moving forward. But like I said, this wasn't like a one-man show. This was really a team effort. BDD ended up getting the broadcast player of the series. Totally understand that. He was a huge facilitator for KT throughout these games. The Rise, the Talia, both of them were really there to create around the map and really open things up for the rest of the roster. Cuz has had a really hard time generating momentum, and honestly, it didn't really look all that good in game number 1, in my opinion. There were a ton of times on the Xin Zhao where I think he just needed to do more if BDD and Dektum weren't there to bail him out in terms of how a lot of these fights went. I think things would have gotten worse, but like I said, BDD doing a great job to open up the map and create more opportunities for KT. Casting was awesome on the top side. I'd love to praise him a little bit more for this performance because, KT has desperately needed some sort of top laner to come in and be more than average, which is what Perfect was. But Rich has been awful in the last couple of weeks on the other side of this, and so I don't want to overreact to Casting coming out and demolishing him in lane. Rich is probably the single worst laner in the entire league, regardless of position, regardless of role. So Casting being able to dominate him in that regard isn't entirely surprising, but it is still good to see. Peter has been a big upgrade in the support position. I would argue that that is the reason KT's fortunes have really shifted. It took Peter some time to get readjusted to playing at a tier 1 level, but once he did, he's been way better than Wei was in the winter split for this team, and I think generally that's added a lot of stability. So congrats to KT. It feels like they're figuring things out. I still don't think this is a great team. I took them out of my top 6 last week because BFX just kind of feels like they've been better than them over the course of this split, but KT still is on pace to be in the playoff conversation. There's certainly no reason why they shouldn't be a playoff team. They absolutely should be a playoff team. If Cuz, in particular, can just stabilize a bit more and have some better early games, I think KT has found a formula that can work for them. But for DRX on the other side, their problems are very predictable at this point. It's very easy to talk about what's going wrong with this team. First off, I think a lot of the players that were overperforming in Winter have just come crashing back down to earth. Rich and Sponge are just not good for the LCK level. Sponge in particular finally felt like something was clicking for him in the Winter split. That is gone. That tiny shred of evidence that Sponge could be a tier 1 player has disintegrated. I get that the Naafiri game in game number 1 was all right. It wasn't really all that bad, but the Skarner game in game 2, like, it's series losing. Like, that is one of those games you just cannot have at the LCK level. He's done of the series. Sponge continues to be on this really bad run over the course of spring so far, and, you know, with DRX not really having the same kind of positives elsewhere on the map that maybe they did in the Winter split, I think it's even more obvious that Sponge just doesn't really do anything out of the jungle position. He's not really a good early game player. He's certainly not all that great of a team fighter, which is what he was in the Challengers League when he was performing really well. It's all just come crashing down, and it's not working, and UCal's not popping off in the way that he was, you know, a couple of months ago in order to hide that in the same kind of way. We already talked about Rich being one of the worst laners in the entire region, again, regardless of position. That continues to pop back up. He was a player who was looking pretty good at times at the start of this year because his team fighting prowess is really good, but again, if you can't survive the laning phase, now that lane swaps are gone, Rich himself has been pretty heavily nerfed as a player, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get replaced at some point this year by somebody, because he's just not in meta. Like, if the game's gonna change to force laning phase to be so important for top laners, Rich cannot play that position. It's just not possible for him at the tier 1 level. Teddy and Plata have not clicked in the same way that they did last year. I thought Plata coming in was going to be an immediate upgrade because of how good he was in 2024, how highly I viewed him as a prospect for so many years, even going back to like 2021, but it's just not worked. Like, Plata, I wouldn't say he's been worse than Ondel was, because Ondel wasn't very good, but Plata certainly hasn't been a gigantic upgrade. Teddy has been performing worse over the past couple of weeks, and like I said, this team was UCal 1v9ing a lot of the times in the Winter split, and that's not even been a possibility because UCal's not popping off in the same kind of way. These two teams were compared a lot by me in the Winter split, but whereas BDD has kind of kept up a lot of his good form, UCal's has kind of fallen off. So for DRX, they're just a bad team. They're a bottom 2 team, and if DNF didn't exist, they would be bottom 1, but luckily for them, DNF does exist, so they just are happily going to sit at 1 and 6 in 9th place in my power rankings. And for KT, you need to pick up these kinds of wins. Again, this team isn't all that far out of a playoff spot. They just need to start getting a little bit more consistent. It feels like they've settled on a starting 5, which is a great start, but they need to be able to follow through the rest of the week. Then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and it's another middle-of-the-table clash, which is very relevant right now. It's NS RedForce taking on BNK FearX, and NS is going to pick up the 2-0 win. Again, not really surprising in terms of where these two teams have been at. BFX definitely feels closer to the bottom half. NS has felt like the only team outside of the top 4 to even be able to compete with the upper echelon, and that kind of continued here, but I think the big takeaway for me is Calyx is the real deal. This guy was super hyped up as a prospect last year, and, you know, going into this year, he's starting to live up to that potential. I get that this kid is very young, but there is a huge mechanical upside if he is going to continue to grow in the way that he is. Not everything was perfect for NS, and in fact, BFX actually capitalized on a couple of really positive areas for themselves, but NS had more than enough firepower to get over it because of the middle of the map. And if you go back to my preseason analysis, and I implore you to think back to my preseason analysis, what did I say about NS? I thought this was going to be a team that needed top and bot to dominate because the middle of the map was going to be the worst in the LCK in total. I think Gideon was ranked 10th in terms of my jungle rankings, and Fisher was ranked 10th in terms of my mid lane rankings coming into the year, and so I thought that the middle of the map was going to have to be protected, but that is not the case right now for NS. They are protecting the rest of this roster. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to Kingen. Kingen did totally fine in this series. In fact, he played rather well, even on the Nidalee pick in top lane. I'm really starting to despise that pick up top lane because it's just so feast or famine. It kind of reminds me so much of the Elise support pick where you have to win early and that champion does nothing in the late game. However, I digress. Gideon and Calyx were incredible because Jiwoo was awful in this series, and I very much debated giving Jiwoo dead of the series. Trust me, it was right on the mind. There were multiple plays in the mid game in game number 2 where he was actively trying to lose it for his entire team. Luckily for him, his jungler and his mid laner were both incredibly good, and they were able to salvage a lot of those positions, but man, Jiwoo needed to step up, and he did not. But Calyx is obviously player of the series. I don't even think it's really all that debatable. This guy absolutely dominated Vikla throughout the entirety of this series, both game 1 and game 2. He was able to get big leads isolated in the 1v1 matchups, played off of his jungler much better, and then, especially in that first game, was able to get out on the map and really move around, create a lot of havoc. In that second game, he was able to do so much damage in the back half of the game that it was almost unfair. Calyx actually looks like a gigantic upgrade here in the mid lane, and if that's going to be the case, if he's going to come in and be way better than what Fisher was, and this was already a team that was competing for top 5, who's to say they can't, like, break into the top 4. They got 4th in the winter split because of the way the bracket ended up working out. You know, they got better. They are playing the best league that they have played right now, and KALX is a big reason for that. I'm just hopeful that he's going to be able to keep it up. Again, I do want to throw the caveat out there. We talked about this for casting in the previous series where he went up against Rich, who's obviously not a very good laner. Well, KALX is going up against Vikla, and so you do want to put at least a little bit of a caveat on the fact that he beat up on the worst mid laner in the region, but still, you know, Fisher wasn't doing this. Fisher wasn't having performances like this. 21-2-20 is not normal, so KALX looking great. Hopefully he can keep it up. Gideon continues to be one of the big surprises and breakout stars of the LCK year. He has been terrific for Nongshim. He was great in winter. He's been great in spring so far. You know, I really valued Gideon when he was on Bro. I just didn't know how it was going to translate here to Nongshim. It has been everything you could ask for, and then some. He's also playing the best league of his career. Like I said, Kingen was pretty good here. Lehens was very active as an engaged threat, mostly for a positive, but sometimes for a negative, and then Jiwoo tried his best to sell the entire game over to BFX because he wanted Diablo to win, I guess. That's like the only thing I could possibly think of, but Nongshim was simply too good to let that happen, so they move above 500 to 4-3 to 9-7 in terms of game score, and BFX, unfortunately, is going to drop to 3-4. Now, there's still a lot of good to take away from this series. Couple of great performances. This bot lane is for real, legit. I know there's nothing left for them to prove. It's not like it's up for debate anymore. We know that this bot lane is legit, and we know that they're good, but they continue to look incredible. Diablo was way better than Jiwoo in this series in terms of the positive plays he was making for his team, and I think, you know, Diablo could be like a secret star for BFX. I did not see that coming in year 1, but he is the biggest reason why this team is doing well. Kellen is obviously, you know, really facilitating that. Kellen will never get any credit, but this guy's awesome. He's been awesome all year long. This bot lane in general has been terrific. I think that there were moments where Raptor was good. Again, moments is kind of the key term there, because I think there were also moments where things were incredibly bad from him, but that's just who Raptor is as a player. Very feast or famine. Honestly, I'm going to continue to say the thing that I said a lot last year. Raptor reminds me so much of Willer. It's actually insane, and I know people kind of complain that Raptor came in and took Willer's spot, but they're very similar players in terms of how they play the game, and I think BFX clearly likes that feast or famine style. Unfortunately for them, the solo laners were not very good. Clear was mostly like just not a factor on the top side, especially on the Scion in game number 2. I'm not really blaming him, but Vikla getting outplayed in the middle of the map was a pretty big problem for FearX, and he's going to get dead of the series. Again, Vikla's just not as good as the other mid laners in the LCK. You can survive in other regions if you're not a great laner. You can't survive here. You cannot even really function in the mid lane if you're a bad laner in the LCK, and so for Vikla, he just is outclassed. There's nothing else really to say. He's the worst mid laner in the league, and I think he's the only thing that's really holding BFX back right now from being a more consistent team, because Raptor and Clear have been in much better form, and Diablo and Kellen have been great all year long. It's really just Vikla as kind of a negative piece, and that's not what Nongshim has anymore. It kind of feels like BFX is a very similar version of what Nongshim was in the winter split. Unfortunately for them, Nongshim is further along now because KALX has really upgraded that middle of the map. Now, if Jiwoo can start following him, things are going to get better. I've been pretty low on Jiwoo's 2025 so far. I think that there have been some good and some bad moments, but, you know, I definitely think he needs to lock in a bit more. But with Gideon and KALX and even Kingen and Lehens playing to an extent that they are right now, again, who's to say that Nongshim can't start competing with the top 4? Then moving on now to day number 2, and we got maybe the most predictable outcome of all time to start day 2. It was Gen.G taking on the DN Freecs, and of course Gen.G absolutely demolished them. This was not even remotely close. It's the undefeated team versus the winless team, and the only shocking thing is that typically this goes the other way in the LCK. Typically speaking, the only upsets we ever get are the worst teams in the league beating the best teams in the league for absolutely no reason, but even Gen.G could not be felled by the power of that right now because DNF is simply too bad. And once again, I feel so bad for Pengyan, and I'm going to talk about this. He got put in the mid lane for this matchup, and we'll see if he ends up playing more throughout the rest of the week, but this is the second time this year that they have put Pengyan in to face off against Chovy, and I think it's just because Bulldog is like terrified of this matchup. I do not understand why they keep throwing this guy to the Wolves to try and take down Gen.G. He's played 2 series all year, and both of them have been against Chovy. It's a completely unfair task to ask of him, but somehow, some way, they continue to try and hope that it works. But for Gen.G on the other side, obviously they dominated this one, and obviously player of the series is Chovy. Do you even need me to say anything at this point? This guy is like legit playing on God mode. He's got the console commands open. He just does everything. Somehow, some way, he's 50 CS up every game, and he's got full pressure, and he's roamed more, and he does 1 billion damage. Like, he's actually just cheating. Like, it's just unreal how good Chovy is. Again, it feels like like I'm a glazer, and everybody in the comments likes to either chime in that yes, Chovy's very good, or tell me that Choky will never be as good as their GOAT, whoever they want to name, you know, whatever, right? But I'm sorry, I can't say it any other way. Like, I watch this guy play, I watch him go 17-0-17 while constantly picking up every bit of CS and also roaming to every fight, and I just go like, why can't we all do this? Like, how does he break the game in the way that he does? Chovy is unreal. Again, he's not even really playing against, like, a star mid laner. Pyongyang was a really interesting Challengers League player, is still a very interesting Challengers League player, but it's not fair, man. Like, if you're not playing against one of the best mid laners in the world, like, you don't even really have a chance against Gen.G. So, credit to Chovy. I also do want to give a shout out to Duro. A lot of talk about his Blitzcrank in game number 2, which was really fun to watch for multiple different reasons. There was some conversation that he should get player of the game over Chovy, and we simply laughed it off because it would be a pity award at that point. I love Duro, and I thought Duro played great in that second game, but I mean, the only reason not to give it to someone like Chovy is because he gets too many of them at this point, but Duro was great. Ruler only died once. He got to play as Xayah, which I think is always fun. Really exciting to see Ruler, you know, actually get to play some of the champions he got known for back in the day. Berserker has been the best player on DNF, and even he was absolutely horrific in this series because there's just no way to go up against Gen.G and actually survive. In any way, Canyon was incredible. How do you give Canyon to Fury? Like, how do we walk away with that? Pioshik was predictably horrendous for DNF, just had absolutely no pressure at any point, as we all could have expected. But again, how do you give Canyon to Fury? How is this possible? What are we doing? Keen dominated on the top side. Dudu's not been at full powers across this split, and Keen took advantage of it. There's just not even really a lot of analysis, man. Like, Gen.G obliterated this one, and DNF sucks. Like, they're 2-14 for a reason in terms of game score. They are barely able to eke out even a game victory. And even then, it's been quite a while. But once again, I just have to offer my condolences to Pyongyang because I do think he is a really interesting mid lane prospect, and he's somebody that I'm excited to see potentially get a shot at some point, maybe even now, on DNF. But why do we keep throwing this guy to the wolves? It's the second time this year that we've done this. Again, I just don't really understand what this guy did to deserve it. Maybe he truly does believe that he can go out there and beat Chovy, and he thinks this is his opportunity, and Bulldog's like, yeah, it's all you, man. You got your chance. I'm not going out there with that series. But whatever it is, they put him in twice, and both times he's not been able to do anything against Chovy. Unfortunately, I do have to give him dud of the series because he was the worst player on the team in this series, although it's very much up for debate. You could really give it to anybody. I would stray away maybe from Dudu on the top side, if only because he wasn't influentially bad, but it's not like anybody on DNF did anything. But Pyongyang was the one who was the most outclassed in terms of his individual matchup. Pioshik continues to be unplayable at the LCK level. I'm serious. I think you just have to bench this guy. There's nothing else left to see. I don't think even the good games at this point would salvage his reputation in my eyes. I think he is long past being an LCK caliber jungler, and I think that's become even more clear. Life was at least active in this series. You can't say that he wasn't trying to do things, even if it didn't necessarily work out. Berserker had his worst series in a while. Like I said, I'm not blaming Dudu. He at least went out there and tried to do some things, but DNF is so far out of the totem pole, like so off of the radar, that they couldn't even activate the bottom of the table curse against the undefeated team. It wasn't even part of their thing. The LCK gods don't even think they're an LCK team in terms of how they've been playing, but DNF are atrocious. 0-7 is indicative of where they're at, and 7-0 is very indicative of where Gen.G is at. This team is dominating, and they've got the best player in the world. Not really a better combination than that. Then moving on to the second series of day number 2, and again, predictable outcome. Hanwha Life Esports taking on OK BRION, and HLE picking up the dominant 2-0, although Bro did put up a little bit of a fight in game number 2, certainly more so than they did in game number 1, because they got ran in circles by Peanuts Poppy in game number 1, as everybody does when they allow that champion to go over to HLE. I honestly don't know what teams are thinking when they allow Peanut to be able to get the champion that, let's not forget, he popularized. This champion was not played in the jungle before Peanut started spamming it in the LCK, like 4 years ago now, and it's just become like one of the most consistent junglers in the game ever since then. I'm not saying it was entirely him. I'm sure it was a solo queue creation before that, but the guy who brought it to top level professional play was Peanut. He's always been the best Poppy jungle player in the world, and he continues to absolutely decimate on it. Bro had obviously no answer. I think some people are going to disagree with my dud of the series, but we'll get into it when we get into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Peanut in the jungle. Again, Poppy, like, what do you want me to say. He ran that game number 1. It's unfair to give him that champ. I know Neferi is incredibly strong, but first of all, Poppy is probably the most consistent counter to Neferi in the game, at least in my opinion. I think that's probably the one that I would lean more towards if I had the option over things like Vi and Xin Zhao that have been considered before because of the knockups. I think Poppy just makes it really difficult for the Neferi to pick her timings to go in, but it's not like Peanut was bad on the Nidalee in game number 2, another champion that he's basically been unbeatable on the entire year. And again, that's funny. It's kind of the old Peanut pick where, you know, the Poppy that he kind of really popularized many years ago, and the Nidalee, which he was always really bad at in the past, that he's become really good at so far this year. It's obviously really cool to see those in back-to-back games, but Peanut's been on fire ever since HLE started to pick the pace back up at the end of the winter split, and he was obviously great at first stand. It's good to see him keep that up. Zeus continues to look incredible. He's an MVP like runner right now. I would say like close to front runner. He's probably in second place for me, but Chovy is kind of running away with the award once again at the moment. But Zeus is right behind him in terms of how things are going. You know, his good games are fantastic. He was overreaching at times and was punished, you know, accordingly in certain moments by players like Hanwha and Closer, but at the end of the day, Zeus's positives were much wider than his negatives. Viper and Delight continue to be awesome. Delight was so funny throughout this entire series. I mean, he was basically like solo playing the Nico. He was like a third solo laner throughout a lot of that game number 2, just with the way that they wanted to kind of coordinate their comp, and Delight is more than willing to be an absolute nuisance on the bottom side of the map if that's what he needs to be. And, you know, just again, like the way that they ended up playing it out was very funny. Viper was very good in that instance and obviously matched Hype's aggressiveness very well by just, you know, answering it with his own. Zeka was the only player who didn't necessarily get the same kind of chance to shine, but it's not like he played bad. It's not like he made mistakes. It was more so just that the rest of the team was doing a lot more of the heavy lifting. HLE's really good. I mean, big shocker, big surprise. This team is very strong, and Bro didn't really have a chance in this series. This team is fine, but once again, one of the things I really want to point out, I see a lot of KT Rolster fans constantly over and over again on Reddit, on Twitter, on every social media site, constantly talking about how, oh, this team would have been better if we kept Hanwha and Hype and, you know, just went and promoted our Challengers League roster and just rolled with them. I'm sorry, man. Most of Bro is this KT Challenger, not most, but a lot of Bro is this KT Challengers League roster, and they're the weak links of this team right now. Hype has completely lost all of his confidence. He plays like the most scared AD carry in the entire universe. Things are not working out for him. His mechanics have really dipped. He's not playing even close to the level he played at on the Challengers League roster. And Hanwha, like I've talked about a lot, has been one of the worst performing junglers in the entire league. I think he's been worse than Cuz. Hype has certainly been worse than Dectum over the past 2 series, but before that I would say Hype was better, so kind of a toss-up in that regard, and maybe Hype's confidence doesn't get killed if he's on KT, but I just don't really understand this idea that KT fans want to push that they would be better with Hanwha and Hype than they would be with Cuz and Dectum. I'm just not even really sold that that's actually true. I really don't think that that would be the case at the moment, because I don't think either combination of those is very good. But Hype is going to get dead of the series here. Again, I think this might be controversial because his KDA is pretty good, and he had a couple of good fights, but man, the bad fights were really bad. Like, his bad moments were easily the worst of anybody on Bro in this series, and they just stood out a little bit too much in my mind for me to really feel comfortable on it. Go watch that Lucian game. It's like textbook. I don't think I can win, and so I'm not even going to try. It's genuinely depressing to watch Hype play the game right now. If he's going to play with this mentality, I think he might even have to put Bull in more consistently. I don't think Bull is better than Hype, but if Hype's going to play scared, you don't have any chance of winning around him. Closer is awesome in the mid lane, easily this team's best player, and he continues to be really good in that role, but Polu, Hanwha, they were just kind of whatever here. Morgan got obliterated by Zeus on the top side, one of the few players that has consistently been able to beat Morgan over the past couple of years. Bro is Bro. You're not freaking out about the fact that they ended up dropping a series to HLE. At the end of the day, this is still a bottom 3 team in the LCK, even if they've made it a lot more interesting than that. But, you know, a lot of the powers that Bro has is because, you know, a lot of the teams just don't take them seriously. HLE definitely showed up here today, and unfortunately for Bro, they didn't take HLE seriously enough to take away a lot of their comfort picks, and, you know, Hanwha Life punished them for it. Peanut was awesome, Zeus was awesome, and they continue their hot streak. Then moving on now to day number 3, our middle day of the week, and we get a very interesting outcome as KT Rolster took on NS RedForce, and NS is going to pick up the 2-0 win once again. It's a 4-0 week for NS here in week number 4. It's exactly what they wanted to draw up, everything kind of going right for them, and they did it against an opposition that I think a lot of people were excited to see them take on, not only because the expectation was that they were going to come in and win this, but because I think, you know, KT had been hotter as of late. They had started to find their own little style, and NS still came out and said, screw it, like, Calyx is a big upgrade to this team. He can hang with BDD in terms of how things are going in the mid lane, and everybody else is just better than their opposition on the other side, and so here we are, NS taking taking a 2-0 victory, which is obviously gigantic for them. For KT on the other side, this team is still KT Rolster. Let's not get it twisted. I understand they've started to pick up some victories against the bad teams in the league, but this is not a team that's going to be going up against the really good teams in the league and consistently winning, especially when Nongshim pulls out a lot of weird picks like they did. I do want to say, because it's still on brand for me, I hate the draft in game number 1 from Nongshim. I think it's ridiculous that they got a win in this one. Anivia top, not a fan. I'm starting to really lose confidence in this. Kingen has spammed this so far in the LCK. Every opportunity he's gotten to play it into things like Rumble, and it's looked bad for the most part. Like, most of the time it's losing, sometimes it's doing something. Like, this game, I think, is a decent example of what it can do if it's working, but most of the time it doesn't do anything, and then you also go for the dreaded Elise support. Reference last week's video if you want to know my thoughts on Elise. I've talked about it forever on this channel, but this champ is dog water, and you can only win on it if you are by far the better player. Luckily for Nongshim, Lehens is so much better than Peter that it didn't really matter. He was going to win on anything that he played with, but you might as well not have a champion. Like, truly, it's like if you put yourself in the game with no abilities. I know, obviously, it's not quite that bad, but Elise doesn't do anything, and so if you're winning on Elise, it just means you can win on anything, and I think that that's kind of a funny little aside for Nongshim. But game number 2, still a very greedy draft. Nidalee top, something that I've kind of, eschewed in recent weeks, kind of talked about how it's not particularly good, but it can work. Like, I think it's got more value than something like an Elise support. I think it's similar in terms of its nature, where it wants to snowball the game and win early, but it can do damage at the very least. It's not going to do any consistent damage, but Kingen made it look really strong here, and in a matchup that I don't even think is all that great. Right? He's going to get player of the series because not only was the Anivia good in game 1, but the Nidalee was very effective playing into Jace into game number 2. This feels like a nightmare matchup for Nidalee. Her whole thing is that she's supposed to get a lead in the early game, and Jace makes that tremendously more difficult, we'll just say, but Kingen played it really well. Honestly, just completely outplayed casting in terms of the 1v1, especially in that first game, and really kind of separated himself. I've been a big fan of what Kingen has been for Nongshim throughout the entire year. I really hyped him up in their playoff run last split. It's good to see that he's carried that over. He hasn't always been great so far in spring. I do think there have been more up and down performances so far this split, but still overall a big positive for him. I do want to continue to shout out Calyx because this guy's just way better than he has any right to be right now. I know that obviously he struggled a bit when he came in last year and had that little opportunity for Nongshim, but with a little bit more time to develop, getting a little bit older and a better team, a significantly better team around him, now he's actually able to show off that this guy is one of the more interesting mid lane prospects in Korea at the moment. BDD is on fire, and he was really good in this series. Calyx matched him in terms of a lot of the pressure he was able to generate. He was everywhere on the map and really was creating a lot for the team. He might not have been as good as BDD, but he just needed to be close, and that would give Nongshim like the advantage there, and that's exactly what happened. Gideon was the better jungler by a large margin, especially from a facilitative perspective. Jiwoo and Lehens still have their own individual problems. I'm super anti-Lehens on Elise, even though he continues to pick it every single series, but again, it doesn't really matter. He's so much better than the players he's playing into, he can get away with it. But for KT on the other side, I'm still excited about this group of 5, and I think there are some takeaways here. BDD continues to be awesome, and this was just a classic KT loss where BDD pops off and everybody else is really struggling at some point, but I do disagree with where a lot of the blame should be thrown here. I see a lot of people blaming Dectum for the one bad play he made at the end of game number 2 on the Kai'Sa where he ults in and immediately dies. Is that a bad play? Yes. Was he super tilted at that point? Yes. He had been playing pretty well throughout he was really good in game number 1. That's the first thing I want to point out on the Kalista. He was like the only one attempting to pull back anything in the early game. BDD on the Corki was obviously attempting to do some damage, but Corki is such a useless pick in the mid lane that it honestly didn't really matter. And then, he had an okay early game on the Kai'Sa and the rest of the map just disintegrated, and I think at that point he was just trying anything to stay relevant. But if you're blaming Dectum for this series, I honestly think you just don't identify talent particularly well, or identify problems particularly well, because the problem this series was jungle. Like, Cuz is going to get dead of the series. Very easy for me to make this decision. He lost tempo every single second that this game was on. It's actually ridiculous how bad Cuz has been across this year. This is the worst year of his career in a large way. Like, it's very obvious to me that this guy just does not know how to maintain a semblance of consistency coming out of that jungle position, and it's affecting the rest of his lanes. Casting got blasted on the top side. I very much considered him for dead of the series because he was worse than Cuz in game number 1, but Cuz was way worse in game number 2, so I kind of leaned in that direction. Peter's macro was horrendous in this series. I still think he can be a good player, but he needs to get a lot more consistent at being able to play around the rest of this team. This looked a lot more like Pioshik in life than it did like the cousin Peter we saw earlier on in the week, which is never really that great of a sign, but I don't really blame Dectum for this series. I certainly don't blame BDD. I think Cuz has to be better. I'm going to reiterate this point. They're going to live and die by what happens in the jungle position for them, and right now that jungle position is a gigantic weak link for them in comparison to the top teams, and it might keep them out of playoffs. Like, they might not be better than a team like BNK FearX in terms of record if Cuz can't get back on track. They needed to at least pick up a game win here. This is a pretty bad loss, and for Nongshim, a 2-0 here is actually pretty ginormous. Not only do they move to 5-3, which puts them in or near the top 4, which is pretty ridiculous, but 11-7 is a really good record for this point. They're definitely on pace to be a playoff team, you know, and they might even get side selection in round number 1, which would be pretty ridiculous, but I'm just happy to see that the progression that Nongshim has made has continuously evolved, and they've continuously gotten better, and that Calyx has only added to that. Every positive trait that they have moved forward with has continued to grow, and this was another example of that. Then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and man, was this a banger. It was T1 taking on Dplus KIA, and T1 is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. I didn't really see this outcome coming, not because I didn't think T1 could win the series, but because after game number 2, it felt like a lot of things were just kind of out of place for them. It didn't really feel like their day, and even at the start of game number 3, it didn't really feel like they were playing all that consistently. I don't think the bot lane was really all that great here today for T1, and I think it was really good for DK. I think aiming did a great job of actually, for the first time in his life, really generating his own individual lead in the early game and actually being able to generate some pressure and really kind of creating a situation where it was, you know, T1 who was on a timer. It just didn't really matter. Owner was the best player on the Rift, and that was the big difference maker to really separate T1 in this series. We'll talk about it. Doran makes a gigantic play at the end of game number 3 as well to really separate things, but how do you not give player of the series to Owner? This is the easiest decision you could possibly make in your life. Owner was so relevant, so important towards keeping T1 in this series at all. You can talk about all the pressure that was put into Faker, or really all the pressure that was given to aiming on the other side of this to try and get him into a good spot in the first place, but Owner was always the one that was setting the trend on his side of the map. He was setting the tempo, he was creating the action, and that's what turned game 3 into such a fun banger for both of these teams, is that Owner was really trying his absolute best to keep the game from swinging out of the pendulum for, you know, DK, swinging in their favor, and he did exactly that. He kept it on T1's side and really did a great job. He's awesome on these carries, and honestly, right now, in terms of where this team is at, maybe we just need to see him more on these kinds of picks. These are the things that I think he's always felt the most comfortable on. However, I think it's never really fit the idea that T1 want to go for. Right now, Faker is not dominating in the mid lane, although he is trying his best, and Guma and KIA, I shouldn't say Guma, the bot lane in general, whoever is playing down there, it's just not been consistent at all because they've not gotten a lot of time to find that consistency, and so you need to start playing for someone else. Owner is the best performing member of the team at the current moment. Let him be a star for them. Let him be an A caliber player. Give him the keys to the kingdom and let him stabilize the team like he kind of has been over the past couple of weeks. It's been really cool to watch him step up and become the primary option for a T1 team that desperately needs one, and I'm just hopeful he's going to be able to keep it up. But once again, how do you not shout out Doran for that final pick onto aiming in the back half of game number 3? If he doesn't make that play, T1 don't win the game. And the funny thing is, this is not the first time he's done something like this year. Doran is exactly who we thought he was going to be, but just in a weird kind of way, where we knew he was going to be clutch in the regular season and clutch domestically because he always has been, but he's taking clutch to like a whole new extreme because he's not really playing all that well for a majority of these games, and then he'll make the biggest play of the game in the last 5 minutes, and he's done that like 4 or 5 times already in 2025. It's crazy just how relevant he's been in the back half of some of these fights, but it's great to see that Doran can step it up when he needs to, because he really has not been consistent at all in terms of how he's played out a lot of these laning phases. So credit to Doran, credit to Owner. Both of them were definitely the carries here. Faker was fine. I'm certainly not trying to diminish his impact on the game. I think the Victor, obviously, we were talking about the Rabadons being hit there by the Victor in the mid lane. It didn't even really matter in the end, but Faker was fine. I was really low on how Guma and KIA played this series. I was not a fan of their positioning. I certainly was not a fan of their laning. I think that everything's just kind of out of whack. I'm not even really blaming them for this because there's just so much drama and turmoil surrounding the bot lane and T1 right now, but they were definitely the weak link of the team in this series. Hopefully, they can start getting getting back on track, but Owner was there to pick up the slack, and he did a fantastic job of it. For DK on the other side, it was really hard to try and pick anyone to be a dud of the series, because I honestly don't think anyone played poor in this series at all for DK. I think that they were pretty consistent, all things considered, across their games. Their win was the most dominant game of the entire series, and their losses were both kind of bangers, especially game number 3, where it felt like they were really in a good position to win that one. Aiming gets caught in the final fight, and all of a sudden things just kind of descend out of control, but I am going to give dud of the series to Beryl on the DK side. And again, this feels like such an unfortunate player to give this to, because I don't think Beryl played bad. I just don't think he made any great plays, and honestly, I'm starting to get back into that KT Beryl mindset that we had last year, where it really felt like coming back to DK at the beginning of the year. He had re-unlocked that 2020-2021 form that he had on Damwon all those years ago, where he was this incredibly big playmaker, and he wasn't really making these gigantic mistakes. He was pairing up really nicely with Lucid in particular in the jungle and just creating a lot of action throughout the map. This is more of the KT Beryl, where he's not playing bad. He's not making gigantic mistakes. He's not throwing away the game, but he's certainly not playing like a top-tier support anymore. It's definitely been the last couple of weeks that have kind of soured me on his gameplay, and the only reason that I'm kind of taking a step in that direction is because he is the kind of player who's shown these tendencies before. If he hadn't been a player that had struggled for extended periods of time in the past, I would be like, it's just been a couple of games, but this is the Beryl that we remember from 2024, and so hopefully he's going to be able to turn that around. I don't even really blame him, though, for this one. He really wasn't all that bad of a player. I debated giving dud of the series to Gumayushi on the other side, who probably was the worst individual performing player, but he had a couple of big moments as well. Shiwu was in consideration, but I thought he was a little bit too relevant throughout this series to do that. It certainly wasn't going to go to Lucid, Showmaker, or Aiming, who I think were all good. Aiming in particular had a phenomenal series and just couldn't quite bring it home in the end. Aiming's having a great 2025, but DK put up a good fight. T1 just came to play here today, and they had the best player on the Rift in Owner, and Doran really stepped up when it mattered the most. I don't think these two teams are really all that separate. I don't feel bad about putting DK up at 3 and moving T1 down to 4 at the end of last week, but with this result, it definitely opens the door for that to switch back. Then moving on now to day number 4, and day 4 kicked off with a very weird matchup between the DN Freecs and BNK FearX, where FearX is going to be able to pick up the 2-1 series win, but we got there in a very interesting way. First off, important to note, Pengyan has stayed starting in the mid lane. It looks like Bulldog is officially benched for this team. It's not just a Gen.G thing here for DNF. They want to keep him in. I think this is pretty obviously the right thing to do. Pengyan has definitely deserved a shot in the LCK for a little while, and obviously we'll talk about how it's not necessarily gone well in his first week starting, but Bulldog has not been very good for this team. He has regressed every single split that he has played for them. He needs time back down in the Challengers League to rediscover how to carry games, because he's completely forgotten how to do that. That being said, DNF is still a disaster. They still have a ton of things going wrong for them right now, and we're going to go ahead and talk about it as we go through this, but for BFX on the other side, they're really starting to find their groove, aren't they? They're really starting to figure out how to play out a lot of these game states. Game 2 was very dominant. Game 3 really just came down to one guy just completely being able to destroy the entire map. So shout out Clear, who's going to get my player of the series. What a Jax game in game number 3. It's funny, I've been really low on Clear for almost his entire career up until this point. Going back to the DRX days, going back to the Sandbox days, it never really felt like I was really buying into him in the way that I wanted to, outside of maybe spring of last year, spring of 2024, where it felt like things were finally starting to click. I think all of that went away in summer, and then obviously he was horrendous in winter, but I'm also kind of low on Jax individually as a champion. I've been pretty vocal about that on the channel as well, and so to see those two things come together and really be able to decimate a Neferi comp is especially pretty funny in my opinion. Credit to Clear, I think he's played much better in spring so far. Him and Raptor have both woken up in terms of what their performances were last year, the reasons they were the carryover players from this Sandbox team to this year. It feels like everything is, kind of falling back into place. This team was top 6 last year. People forget that. They made playoffs in the summer split, and part of that was Clear and Raptor. Actually, a lot of that was Clear and Raptor stepping up and being really integral pieces. So to see Clear get back on that, wavelength and really start to be able to carry games in the back half again is nice, but Raptor being able to out-jungle his jungle opposition is also a very big piece of the puzzle, and I would argue it's probably the biggest piece of the puzzle right now. It's just a jungle-focused game that we're playing at the current moment. I hate to simplify it so much, but really when you look at the way that the map is structured, the way that the new, map is, I guess just made in general, the fact that there are so many objectives constantly to take it really does favor the jungler who's better, and certainly the jungler who's more proactive and is able to get more resources for himself and for his team, and Raptor is getting back into the stage of doing that at a pretty high level. I liked Raptor a lot last year. I thought he was pretty good in 2024. He just has not been able to carry that form over. I'm glad to see it's coming back. Now, Pyosik, again, has not been resistance at all against anybody that's gone up against him, but it's good to see that it's in there for Raptor. And this is not a once-off. He's been pretty good over the past couple of weeks. Vikla, I thought was totally fine in this series. You just need to see him be able to survive in the mid lane. That's been a problem for him. He did more than survive, and for once, Diablo and Kellen are not the first two players we're talking about for BFX in a good way. It's really nice to see this team be able to pick up a series win, even if it's against a hapless DNF team, and not rely on their bot lane popping off to do it. Their bot lane still was very good. Diablo is very consistent. Kellen, I thought, had a really nice series, especially in that game 2 on the Ashe, but they didn't need to be the stars here. Clear could take over in game 3, Raptor could take over in game number 2, and things could open up for BFX. If you have more win conditions, that means this team is getting better, and if Vikla can stabilize in the mid lane, I think you actually have a team that very much can compete for top 6, and they're there right now. They're 500 in terms of game score, and in terms of series score. But for DNF on the other side, Piosik's dud of this series. I understand that you don't see that in the KDA, and quite frankly, you might not even see that in terms of the tape if you really just want to look at where all the action was going, but Pyosik was given basically a golden opportunity in this series, getting Nefiri to be able to do something, and he just can't do it. Raptor was the better jungler, and it's completely unacceptable for Pyosik to be where he's at. I think a lot of people are rightfully going to point their fingers at Pungyan or Berserker or Life or one of those players, right? Even Dudu on the top side, because Clear was so good in game number 3, but to me, it's very obvious that Pyosik was the one that needed to carry this game. That's how this entire comp is set up in game number 3. It's really kind of how game number 1 is set up as well in terms of generating pressure in the early game, and he just did not do that. Pyosik was not good enough. He wasn't good on Skarner at all. In fact, he was horrendous on Skarner, got completely out-jungled by Raptor on Lilia, and then the Nefiri was just not able to take over. So yeah, he's gonna get my dud of the series. I've given up almost entirely on Pyosik as a player. Almost any other jungler would have won this game in this position, and he was incapable of doing it because he's not a good player. That being said, the rest of the team still is bad. I thought Berserker had a really bad week, certainly one of his worst, if not his worst, back in the LCK here since coming back over at the beginning of the year. Not a great game number 3 on the Misfortune, maybe the worst MF game I've seen in a while. I really like that champion. I continuously defend her. This was not a good example of that. Pungyan had a really bad debut week. Vikla was supposed to be one of those matchups he could actually start to develop some pressure in. That did not happen. In terms of KDA, he was probably the worst player on the Rift. Life continues to be one of the weaker supports because he has no chemistry with anybody else on the rest of this team, and it feels like he's by himself all the time. Dudu got outplayed by Clear. It's just not working for DNF. 0-8 is bad, and it symbolizes where they're at. 3-16 is a really, really horrific game score, and it's frustrating because this team had so much potential at the beginning of the year, and it's all gone by the wayside. They're the worst version of what they could possibly be, and it's so disappointing. But for BFX, on the other side, just happy to see them start to get into form. Clear and Raptor in particular looking really good. Just very hopeful they can keep it up. That's going to bring us to our second series of day number 4, though, and we thought we saw a blowout earlier from Gen.G. Oh no, this was the dominating series. It was Gen.G taking on DRX, and oh my god, was this just completely unfair. The only thing that DRX can do to salvage themselves from a perfect game coming in from Gen.G is just put Yorick on an AFK island to take a couple of towers. Outside of that, absolutely nothing to generate for DRX throughout the entirety of this series. This was one of the largest stomps I have ever seen, and Gen.G is on a complete warpath right now. Who is going to stop this team? Genuinely, who is beating them in the form that they are in? It's so funny because we were talking about it at the beginning of the year, and we were saying, this Gen.G team probably not going to be able to live up to the standards of the 2024 version that had really been so good. They made, semifinals of Worlds, and that was considered a disappointment. That's how good they were in the LCK throughout all of last year, but this team right now, in this form that they are in, looks better than they have ever looked, maybe ever. Like, truly this week, these 2 series that I watched, and, caveat again, of course, they are against teams that they should be beating, but these 2 series, these 4 games, back to back to back to back, might be the best that I have ever seen from a team. It's genuinely at that level, and they're doing it in the LCK, what most people consider to be the best region in the world. It's unfair. The level that these guys are playing at is unreal, and all we can really hope for is for them to be able to keep it up, because it's all 5 of their members that are really performing well. Chovy's the obvious choice for player of the series, and I know what I said. I'm like, Chovy's the best player on the Rift every game he plays. You can't just give it to someone else as a consolation prize? Well, it was up in the air for me, and so yeah, I'm leaning towards Duro in this series. He's getting player of the series for me. If you wanted to give it to Chovy again, who am I to argue? I mean, he is still the best player on the Rift in almost every single game that he plays, but Duro was right up there with him in terms of the performances that he was putting out, and he was so awesome over the course of this entire week that it felt wrong to really even consider anybody else for player of the series here. I just want to give a big shout out to Duro because I do think he's gotten better and better every single game he's played here on Gen.G. I hyped this guy up so much in the offseason because I was such a big fan of his 2024 tape, and you know what? It took a minute. It really wasn't all that good in the winter split. It took him some time to get comfortable, but once he did, now that he is comfortable, he is the best support in the league in terms of production. I don't even think it's up for debate. Delight has been awesome and has been the best support over the course of this year. Over the course of the 4 weeks that have happened in the LCK, right now, Duro's been better than Delight, he's been better than Lehens, he's been better than Beryl, he's been better than KIA. Put anybody up against what Duro has been doing, and I don't think you can say that anyone has been better. Now, of course, the caveat is that Gen.G is the best team in the league, and therefore Duro has the easiest job in the league, theoretically, but I think he's been one of the best players on this best team. I think he's been better than Ruler, I think he's been better than Canyon, I think he's been better than Keen. I think Chovy is 1A, or I guess 1, and Duro is probably, like, 2 on this team in terms of, like, my rankings of how important they've been over the course of this split. So I just want to give him some credit because I really do think he's been that good. But of course, again, if you wanted to give player of the series to Chovy, who am I to deny you? That Ari game in Game 1, the Galio in Game 2, he massacred UCal in this matchup, and UCal is by far DRX's best player. So who am I to sit here and say that Chovy doesn't deserve it? Ruler goes deathless once again, as he does basically every series, this time into Teddy and Ondil, who's back in on the side of DRX. We will talk about that. Canyon goes deathless. Once again, who's giving Canyon Neferi Nidalee? Like, what is the draft plan? Do we have a draft plan? Was DRX's goal to lose in a record amount of time in this series? What is even the point of giving these over if you think you have a chance in a series like this? Keen is now starting to pop off once again on the top side. Everything's working for Gen.G. At this point, it's hyperbolic for me to say anything else because I'd just be going over and over and over again about the same team. They're awesome. They're 15-3, 16-3, I should say. 8-0. This team is ridiculous. And DRX on the other side is not very good. Again, if DNF didn't exist, this would be by far the worst team in the LCK. They are alone in the bottom 2 pretty clearly. And unfortunately for DRX, it's everybody now. It's not even UCal who can be the savior. UCal's going to be done of the series here because he got massacred by Chovy. This was a horrendous performance. The Azir in Game 1 was awful, arguably the worst player in that game. I think it's pretty inarguable he was the worst player in Game 2, although maybe you can argue that Rich was actually the least valuable player for DRX because he actually went and took towers, which means he ruined the perfect game, which is a really rude thing for him to do, but UCal was just nothing, absolutely nothing, like a complete net negative the entirety of this series, and UCal's been bad over the course of spring. I've completely given up on DRX. I think UCal is completely mentally checked out, and if that's the case, this team is doomed, because Teddy is not a primary option. He's never been. Sponge has reverted back to being the worst jungler in the league. Ondil comes back in to replace Plata because they're trying to find anything. They're trying to recapture any of that magic that they had in the winter split. That certainly didn't happen in this series. Ondil looked like an absolute chump in comparison to what Duro was on the other side as a support. And like I said, Rich's biggest contribution to this entire series was taking a tower, or 2. I think he took 2 towers in game number 2. Awesome, man. You went like 0-7 in game number 1 on Jace playing into Rumble. It's not a good look for DRX. This team is absolutely atrocious, and Gen.G is dominant. But what else do you even really want me to say? This is the most obvious outcome of all time. The only fun part is just how ridiculous it was. But that's going to bring us to our 5th and final day of action here in the LCK in week number 4, and we kicked off our 5th day with the biggest upset maybe of the split up until this point. Bro taking on T1 and taking down T1. Bro picks up the victory here. They win 2-1. T1 finally, after they start to develop some momentum, they pick up a win against DK. Things start to go right for them. It crashes back down to earth with a tremendously bad loss to Bro. This is unacceptable for a team like T1. You can't be a top 4 team right now in the LCK and have a result like this. You just can't really get away with it in the situation that you're in. You sold your soul, and unfortunately, you gotta live with the consequences. But for Bro, I think some right lessons are being taken from this, some wrong lessons are being taken from this. I think that there are multiple things to talk about in terms of why Bro ended up picking up this victory, but they always do this at least once over the course of a split. They beat one of the upper tier teams for basically no reason. That's what this was. I'm gonna talk about it because I'm not changing my opinion on Bro just because of this victory. I know people are going to be upset by that, but I don't think my thoughts and opinions on OK BRION change all that much here, but Hype is going to get player of the series. Trust me, I'm going to give him his credit when it's due. I think he was really good on the Misfortune in game number 3. He was really essential towards picking up that victory in that third and final game, and I think if he were a little bit worse, like if his ult timings were a little bit less perfect, because they were kind of perfect on the bullet times throughout a lot of the back half of this game, maybe the game does not go in favor of Bro. But I do want to say, this doesn't change my mind about Hype, and I know people really want me to be higher on this guy, and people probably want me to just blindly agree with Reddit and be like, oh, KT's so dumb, they're so stupid for getting rid of, for loaning out Hype and getting rid of Hanwha and not just running it back with challengers. I don't agree with that. Like, it's not something that I agree with. It's not my personal take. It's not my personal opinion. That being said, Hype was really good in this series. It's the first time in the LCK, especially since Winter, where Hype has really stepped up and actually been somebody that looked like he could win games at this level. Better late than never. I'm hoping this is the start of something that can be more sustainable. And you know what? Shout out to all the KT fans. If I'm wrong and Hype starts, going on a run now, if he picks up some confidence and he starts playing a lot better, more consistently, more power to him. I don't want the guy to fail. I don't want him to be bad. I just don't really understand if KT fans don't watch Bro games outside of the big ones or what, right? Like they just assume Hype has been good all split long. This is an outlier in terms of performances from Hype, but I'm glad it's there. Hopefully it stops being an outlier and starts being something that can be a bit more repeatable. The other player that you have to talk about here is Closer in the mid lane. I hate to say that this was a two-player series because I think players like Morgan had moments, Polu had moments, but Closer and Hype 2v8'd in this series and genuinely popped off in every way that they possibly could. I saw someone call this a legacy series for Closer. I wouldn't quite go that far. He was better than Faker, but you know what? This happens to Faker against former T1 players. I don't know why this has been so consistent. I've talked about it on the channel before, but when Faker plays against these like former SKT players or players that scrimmed with Faker very regularly, they always beat him. Like they are so consistent at being able to take him down, whether it was Closer. We saw it last split with Fisher, with him being able to just kind of go into him for basically no reason. It's just like it's a weird little trend that Faker has had that a lot of former SKT mid laners have always played really well. Into him, Closer is no exception. He's always been pretty successful into Faker, and this was another great example of that. The way he opened up the map on Taliyah really was gorgeous and beautiful, and like I said, Hype is player of the series. Closer is, 1B to Hype's 1A in this series. Both of them were absolutely fantastic, and I've been very high on Closer. I'm gonna be honest, I think this is the best year of his career. I know that might be a hot take because he's been an All-Pro before, but I was always very against that All-Pro selection. I think he's playing better now as an individual than he ever has at any point, and I'm really excited to say that. Morgan had a couple of flashy moments here, a couple of not so flashy moments, especially in their loss in game 2, but, he stepped up when it mattered, even if Dorian was really good on the other side of this. Hanwha is just way too aggressive for his own good. He's going to get into way more trouble than it's worth, and I still think he's quite a bad jungler at this level. Owner, for the most part, was better, but Owner also got in his own way in game number 3, and so we'll get into that, but I don't think it was Hanwha who was quite taking advantage of those situations, more so, Closer and Hype taking advantage of a lot of those situations and Hanwha being around for it. Polu had a couple of really nice setups here, but was not consistent. Certainly was not aggressive at all, so I don't want to give him too much credit. Again, this was a 2v8. Closer and Hype were awesome, and T1, I think you've really, thrown a wrench in this team if you are management, if you are the coaching staff, if you are ownership. I think the way that this entire bot lane situation has gone down clearly is having an effect on how this team is playing, and if you want to look at this from a KDA perspective, you're not going to understand what I'm about to do, but watch this game and tell me that Gumayusi wasn't the worst player in this game. I'm serious. I don't want to be a Guma hater, and I really hate being in that position because I was such a Guma hype-up man last year. I was talking about Guma on T1 for almost all of 2024 as the one guy who was playing well the entirety of the year, the one who carried them to the World Championships. That was the player that I was talking about, but I just can't watch how he played this week and talk about him in a positive light. I don't think he was good at all. He wasn't very good in that first series against DK where aiming was definitely better, and he got outplayed by Hype. Nobody has been getting outplayed by Hype, and Guma got outplayed by Hype. It's just disappointing. I'm not saying that Smash coming in would have fixed all the problems. I know people think that I'm a gigantic Smash defender, but that's because it was the coaching staff's decision. Clearly, whatever they saw in scrims led them to believe that they had a better shot of winning games with Smash in than they did with Gumayusi, and we just saw it on film, on tape, on the Rift. It's just crazy to me. Guma's not playing well. Go watch that Lucian game. He did nothing in that game. He was not active. He was not looking to make any plays. it's just disappointing. Like, I think his confidence is shattered. The whole situation has just been a disaster in general, and Guma, I think, unfortunately, his play is kind of being affected by it right now. Now, Owner was also really bad at the end of Game 3, but he was also the only reason they were in that game. Doran was awesome in this series. I feel so bad because he dominated Game 2, and he was very relevant on the Scion in Game 3, and it did not matter. Faker was not as good as closer on the other side, especially in terms of playing the map, and KIA was just kind of around for all this. But again, the outside noise of T1 is clearly affecting them because all of these players are playing below their own skill levels. Now, we expect T1 to turn it up. It's just what they do. It's how this team operates, but they need to do it sooner rather than later. They're sitting at 500. They have the same record as BNK FearX. Nobody would have expected that 4 weeks in. And for Bro, they're only one series behind T1. They're one game behind T1 in terms of the technical standings. Hype is starting to level up. Closer's been awesome over the course of this year. Like an all-pro caliber mid laner. Again, he's been playing phenomenal. And even if I think Hanwha has been pretty bad and Morgan's been inconsistent and Polu's not a star support, you've got something here. You just need to build on top of this. If Hype in particular can just carry this form into more than just this series, it's going to be so big for Bro, but I'm still on a wait-and-see approach with them. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here in week number 4, and it's going to be the last one of day 5. It's going to be Dplus KIA taking on Hanwha Life Esports, a very fun matchup, and Hanwha Life is going to be able to pick up the win. Name a better duo than Dplus KIA going up 1-0 in a series and then throwing it away. It's all they do. It's all they know. It's all they can possibly do, and it's just really funny to continuously watch for DK. This team really struggles to be able to generate early leads if they don't have pressure through the middle of the map. Aiming is actually playing so well right now. I know that feels weird to say because he was good last year, but go back and watch my analysis on Aiming last year. This is a different player right now. I want to be clear. I'm not trying to just hate on a player to hate on him. If I really hated Aiming, I would stick to my take last year that the dude is a KDA warrior and that he's only playing for stats and he's not really impacting the game all that much. Aiming is trying to do things now. Lucid is attempting to play for him in the bot lane, but that means that mid lane is now actively losing regularly, and that's just not doable for DK. For HLE on the other side, they just rely on their ability to outplay their opponents. Their macro is still incredibly good because it's being led by Peanut and Delight, who are both incredibly smart players. Viper very rarely makes gigantic mistakes, and it allows the room for Zeus and Zeka to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of the plays that they're going for. Case in point, Zeus being way over-aggressive throughout a majority of this series, but for the most part, it's definitely still valuable for Hanwha Life to have that little dichotomy, and it helps them very easily win games that they're allowed to establish tempo in early on. That's what Peanut's really good at, and Viper was really good at following through in this series. He's going to get player of the series. The Callista, the Jhin, both of those games I thought were really nice coming in from him. Obviously, Aiming put up a pretty good fight on the other side, but Viper was the better AD carry in this series, and that was going to be more than enough to get HLE across the finish line. He's been pretty consistent. I don't really have a ton to say about Viper. He's exactly who we think he is. There's not really a lot of big analysis to give, but Peanut had a great week overall for HLE. I think almost an underratedly good week for HLE. Maybe not so much in that first series where he was terrific, but he was awesome in this series as well, and I'm just excited to see Peanut back in form because I think there was a time in winter where I was concerned that it was going to be a bit, just kind of good from Peanut, maybe not great from Peanut, a bit inconsistent from him throughout the year. He has not been inconsistent ever since that playoff run. He has just been one of the best junglers in the world as per usual. Business as usual for him. And then Zeka obviously got back into form in this series. He was better than he was earlier on in the week, even in their dominant win. He decimated Showmaker in lane. I think that's really where a lot of the difference was felt. Showmaker was down in gold throughout the entirety of this series, and that is a credit to Zeka, who is a better player than Showmaker at this point in his career. Like I said, Zeus was a little bit too far forward throughout a lot of this series, but you can live with that. Delight, very aggressive in terms of some of these engages, especially on the Nautilus in game number 1, but again, you can live with that because you'd rather see those players try and take some risks because you know you have such good macro, you know you have a really good floor with a lot of these players that if it does land, you just dominate a team like DK in games 2 and 3, and that's what you want to see. And then for Dplus KIA, the story has honestly become remarkably simple. Lucid is playing really well and is in great form right now. I wouldn't say he's in as good a form as he was at the beginning of the year. It's not quite the same kind of dominating games, especially early, as he was having in winter. Aiming's in phenomenal form right now, genuinely fantastic form. Shiwu, I think, is playing totally fine. He wasn't really given the keys to the kingdom in this one on the top side. He was asked to play, Renekton, Scion, like the more standard things that he can't really break the game open on. But the problem is that Beryl, first of all, had a really bad week. I think that he was kind of a pretty big enter in the back half of this series. I think this series was worse for him than the one I gave him dud of the series for against T1 earlier on in the week, and more notably, Showmaker just was not able to survive in that mid lane 1v1, which is really not acceptable for Showmaker in the place that he's at in his career. He's got to be able to do better than this. If he's going to be down in CS and down in gold in every single game that he plays, it's not going to be good. Go look at the GOL right now on Showmaker. It's not as good as you think it is. He is not doing as well in terms of his laning stats as you would imagine. His KDAs look really good. He's a really good late game team fighter. His 1v1 mechanics in the mid lane have definitely not translated from what Winter was. He was awesome in Winter. In my opinion, the best player in the LCK, specifically in the regular season in the LCK Cup before we got into playoffs, but he's not been able to carry that form over, and he's always been a pretty inconsistent player, especially since Canyon left. I think that's carrying over still, but I'm just hopeful he's going to be able to lock in at some point. Zeka, it's okay for Zeka to be able to outplay him, but if Showmaker really wants to step up and be this team's carry like he was throughout a lot of Winter, it's going to have to start with being more consistent in the 1v1. I think you need to give Shiwu more opportunities to carry games on the top side. He's clearly a big piece of the puzzle, and Shiwu, Lucid, and Aiming might need to be the players that you're actually playing for. I get that Showmaker and Beryl are kind of legacy pieces here on Dplus KIA and the main characters in terms of the marketing and everything, but right now, I think focusing your attention towards getting Aiming into the late game, perhaps getting Lucid out onto carries in the early game, allowing him to skirmish a lot. I think that's probably the game plan. Even get Showmaker out on the map and start moving him around. Like, I like things like Pantheon. I would love things like Ryze and Talia and, you know, Ari and a lot of these more skirmish-oriented picks. I think that really plays into the style that Dplus wants to go for right now. I just don't think Victor and Azir necessarily fit that in the same kind of way. These picks that want to scale up and play for team fights, I just don't know if you're getting the most out of your players in that regard. But DK goes 0-2 this week. They fall from 5-1 to 5-3. Certainly not great for them, but HLE moving to 7-1. It's a really great start for them. Really, again, the hope is for them to keep it up, but it's clear it's kind of a two-horse race at the top of the LCK right now, and HLE is very much a part of that. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCK week number 4 overview and analysis video up on the screen. The updated standings after 4 weeks of action. Again, I know this video is coming out after the first night of LCK week number 5. I have not seen any of those games. I don't know the results of any of those games, and so they're not influencing the power rankings here, but you can see the power rankings next to each team in that first column to the right. Change would be how they have changed from last week to this week, but as you can see, no changes this week. Everything kind of going as expected. Even the upset's not really changing my thoughts too much. I'm taking more of a wait-and-see approach on a lot of these teams. You know, DK could move down to 4, T1 could move up to 3. I think that that's fair. I don't feel comfortable putting Nongshim in the top 4 just yet, although they very much are knocking on the door, but it's very clear. Gen.G at 1, HLE at 2, and then whatever order you want the others in, I think is kind of fair and up to you. DK was not good. They went 0-2 across this week, but T1 dropped a series to Bro, so do I feel comfortable enough to put them above DK right now? Probably not. DK had the hardest schedule in the league this week. They had to face, you know, T1 and HLE, but again, T1's ranked below them, so it's up to you. Do you think it's absurd and insane that I have T1 below DK even though they beat them? Let me know how stupid I am in the comments. I'm always curious to hear you guys' thoughts there. Nongshim, of course, is going to be at 5, and I did consider putting KT back up at 6 and moving BFX down to 7, but I just couldn't really justify it considering the fact that BFX does have a bit of a lead in the standings right now. I don't know how different they are in terms of their talent level, but for me, they're going to stay there for now. Bro is very clearly number 8. I don't think they're as good as KT or BFX, but I think they can make some upsets and they can pull off some, you know, really fun series. Closer is playing out of his mind right now, but the rest of the team still concerns me. And then, you know, as I've said all week, DRX and DNF are clearly the 2 worst teams in the league, so they stay at 9 and 10. Let me know if you agree or disagree with those, or if I'm super dumb for them down in the comment section below. But let's go ahead and move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 4. Player of the week, very easy. Come on, man, it's Chovy. Like, I'd love to not be a Glazer and give it to somebody else, but are you honestly going to look me in the eyes and tell me that Chovy wasn't the best player in the LCK this week? Because that would be absurd. Like, you would be out of your mind. The only travesty is that the way I've set this graphic up, I can only show 3 games from the week. He played 4 games and all of them were unreal. I don't think he died this week. I think he went deathless across all 4 games. That's how ridiculous this was, whether it was the DNF series or the DRX series. The only caveat is that he played the 2 worst teams in the league and absolutely decimated them. But he decimated them at a level that we just don't see, like, ever. I'm sorry for glazing him, but he's awesome. He's the best player in the world, and he's player of the week here. My honorable mentions, his teammate, Duro. He's going to get an honorable mention here Awesome week from him. I think he would have gotten player of the week in 99% of weeks, but with the way that Chovy played, unfortunately, his teammate is going to steal it from him. And then Peanut, the jungler for Hanwha Life, also was pretty terrific over the course of this week. Really did establish a lot of the tempo and, is a big reason why HLE is the second best team in the league right now and, keeping up with Gen.G. I also considered Kingin as an honorable mention. Consider him like the third honorable mention for player of the week, the top laner for Nongshim, but Chovy was the easy choice here. And then for dead of the week, it's going to be Sponge, the jungler for DRX. I just don't have any faith in Sponge anymore. He completely ran it throughout all of this week. I think Pengyan, the mid laner for DNF, was definitely in consideration as well, but I wanted to give him a little bit of a break because not only did he have to play against Chovy in his first series back, but this is really his first full week in the LCK. I don't want to blame him too early, but if he plays like that again, he's definitely going to be on the chopping block for next week. But for now, Sponge was equally as bad and has significantly less excuses, so Sponge is going to get my dud of the week, and Chovy is going to get my player of the week. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're, of course, going to be posting about the LCK every single week on this channel, but we cover all three of the other major regions as well, so the LTA North, the LEC, and the LPL every single week. We also cover the NACL Tier 2 in North America. We actually posted a video about that earlier today. If you're interested in that, check that out. But if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all